Okay, people are coming in. We'll give people time to log in and all right.
All right.
I think we can get started, Dan.
Fantastic. So first of all, welcome everyone to this evening's session. My name is Dan Brake. I'm the Executive Vice President of Operations, Cohort Operations and Technology with Sequence Bio, a local biotech startup. I think I can still say startup. We've been around for a few years now, but I'm also the Vice Chair and incoming Chair of techNL, which is why I'm introducing the session this evening. So a brief overview on who techNL are, and in case you don't know, is we are a not-for-profit industry association, and we work really closely with our memberships with industry and government to shape the policy and issues that matter most to the technology sector and our members here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And as the voice of a $1.6 billion industry, our mission is to help our members grow and scale through our work in talent development, programming, technology advocacy, digital transformation, and strategic partnerships. And one of the things we hear from our members a lot is the talent gap. And so I'm also chair of the talent committee at techNL. And what we're trying to do is address the problem where we have a lot more jobs than we have graduates coming out of technology programs to fill the jobs. So it's really important that we engage students, we engage the youth, and we help people understand what we do as a sector and what we do as an industry. And so we're thrilled to have so many students here tonight to learn about something that's really important to us at Sequence Bio. You're going to hear a lot more from folks at CoLab about it as well. But and that's GitHub, and version control and source control is just fundamental to any application development team. And for us, we actually also use it as part of our hiring practices when we're hiring new developers. So it is something incredibly important. It's almost like a portfolio for someone working in technology. So so you're going to hear lots more about that and in a few moments. So another note for everyone, if you, as a student, you can apply to join techNL for free, where you can hear about other companies and hear about things that are happening in the technology sector. There's also going to be a door prize a bit later, donated from CoLab. And there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. So pop your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, so that can be facilitated at the end of the session. So right now, that's it from me. I'm going to turn it over to Sammy Deacon-Sharp from CoLab, who's going to be introducing Jack Harrhy, who's our speaker for this evening.
Hi everyone, I'm Sammy. I'm not sure how familiar everyone here is with CoLab, but last month we released CoLab 3.0 to our customers, a cloud-based design review platform for engineering teams. Our web app uses Python Flask, but to get CoLab 3.0 to where we wanted it to be, we had to make some key changes to our stack. We switched from REST API to GraphQL endpoints and started using React.js for the front end. And these changes have enabled us to build a product that we're really proud of. And one of our goals now is to become the industry standard for engineer design teams, much the same way that GitHub is the preferred platform for software development. And there's no better person to teach you about GitHub than Jack Harrhy, who is a co-worker of mine at CoLab. Personally, I would describe Jack as being our resident GitHub expert. Whether it's failing unit tests or improving our configuration, anytime we have a discussion surrounding GitHub, Jack is always front and center. And this is no surprise given he has worked as a professional software developer since 2018, but he has also been a GitHub user since 2014. Previously, he's worked for Blue Drop Performance Learning and has worked on miscellaneous projects with Memorial University. He's also currently an undergraduate student at MUN and the president of the MUN Computer Science Society. On a personal note, Jack moved from Wales in the United Kingdom to Newfoundland in 2008, and I'm sure that's something you're going to pick up on the second he starts talking. So now I'm going to turn over to Jack to share some of his renowned knowledge with you all.
Thank you very much, Sammy. Thank you, Dan, as well, for the introduction, and thanks especially to techNL for inviting me to be here today. Let me just share my screen. Give me a second while I do so. Okay, I should be sharing my screen. If my screen isn't there, just a message in chat, but I'll assume it's good to go. So, GitHub, collaboration at scale. This talk is about the website GitHub, but it's also about the tool Git and the idea of version control and why all of these terms and websites and stuff are very crucial to any software developer's tool belt. So, of course, Sammy introduced me. I'm Jack Harrhy. I've worked as a software developer for a bit. I'm at MUN. I'm quite passionate about this stuff. And can pretty much say that the current job that I have because I used GitHub quite a while ago, and I kept using it. And when I went into the workforce, I was able to use my GitHub profile as a very valuable asset. So we're going to discuss a few things here today. We're going to discuss exactly what is GitHub. We're going to show the process of creating a repository, making changes to that repository, scaling up, showing what exactly large-scale GitHub looks like, and the value of GitHub. So what is GitHub? And one thing to know, this isn't exactly a workshop. I'm not going to be expecting everyone here to be actively following along with me. This is more just me showing you the value of GitHub and what exactly it is and what it does, and you can just be along for the ride. So GitHub itself, as you can see by its homepage, sells itself as where the world builds software. Millions of developers and companies build, ship, and maintain their software on GitHub. So GitHub itself is a platform for things called Git repositories. GitHub's name is GitHub. It is a hub for Git. Git itself is the underlying tool, and Git is what you call a version control system. It's a tool that tracks changes to files over time. So let's say you have built a document. Now, this example is something that I've done many times before, and I assume many of you have. But when we say version control tool, what is version control? So here we have a document, and say we've saved this file and we're happy with it, but we notice, oh, it's not done yet. So let's take this document here and let's duplicate it. Let's call this document v2. Now, this is document v2. We make a change to this one. Oh, we should make a copy of that one because we want to have history of our changes. We make this one document v3, and we call this one final. And we're just saying this is our final version of this document. But of course, this isn't it. Likely last minute, we notice, oh, I've got to make this last little tiny change. We call this one document v3 final v2. I myself used to do this countless times. I assume most other people have. If you're ever someone that does digital art, saves documents from their computer, you've likely done something like this before. This doesn't scale. This doesn't work for software. This is difficult to manage for other fields. This is not how you manage versions. Because the idea is here, if we just had this document, this version 3, we'd have no paper trail. Say if we wanted to go back to the original version, we'd have to keep around all of these files. And say if we want to send someone this file, do we send the final version? What if accidentally we selected the wrong one? We send it to this version instead. You can tell that this gets quite messy quite quickly. So I'm going to show you an example of an application. Now, this application itself doesn't matter whatsoever. This application that I've built is a website. This website simply returns the text, "Hello, GitHub session folk." This website is simply an application that I've called migrate app. It has app.py and it has readme.md. If I open up these two files, you'll see I have migrate app. It says hello to you. It can add two numbers together. And in app.py, we just have a couple lines of Python. The code itself doesn't matter, but the idea is I have a project in front of you. It has some code. Now, I want to send other people this code, both for them to view it and also for them potentially to make changes to it. If we didn't have GitHub, what else would we use? So we could use Google Drive. And I'm going to try and use Google Drive. I'm going to take this application we have here. I'm going to take it. I'm going to compress it into a zip file. And once this is done, I have my application bundled into a zip file. And I drag it into Google Drive. And I upload it. It says it has 2 hours left, which makes no sense. Of course, things mess up the second that I try and actually run them. Less than a minute left. Sounds a lot better. So here is this website packaged into a zip file. And say I want to show the world this zip file. So I can take this link here, copy it, and then ta-da, I have a link to the application that I've written that I can give it to other people. The one thing you might have noticed is it says, "Hello, GitHub session folk." But GitHub is spelled like this. This is the incorrect casing of GitHub. So all of a sudden I know I have an issue and I want to change it. So I have to come in here and I have to change this H from lower to uppercase. And I come in, I restart my application, I come back in, and there you go. I've created version 2 of what was version 1. So this file here is now out of date. Now you might be saying to yourself, but Jack, GitHub does have version control. So if I did, Google Drive does have version control. So if I come in here, move this to trash, and then I take this folder, and I convert this folder into the new version of migrate app. And I then take this file and put it into Google Drive. You'll see it will actually acknowledge that this is a different version. It's version 2. So of course, Git Drive is a lot better than this mess. It actually will version it for you. But of course, this is a zip file, and there's no way to view the code in it without downloading it and having a text editor locally. And how would we even access this file? Say if we had a server somewhere that we wanted to run this application, where would we even put it? How would we download stuff from Google Drive to run it? This is where GitHub comes in. So GitHub itself contains things called repositories. We talked about earlier that GitHub is a platform for Git repositories. So I'm going to create one of them. I'm going to come into new. I'm going to call this one migrate app. I'm going to call it migrate app, exclamation mark. I'm going to make it public because I want the world to see this. And I'm going to create repository. So all of a sudden, you'll see I have this page created here. I'm on github.com/Jack Harrhy/migrate app. So this link that you see here is the link that I can give other people, and I'll actually put it in the chat in Zoom right now. This link is a link to my project. Right now, there's nothing interesting there, but as you can see, it's a lot nicer of a link to give to other people. It's also underneath my name. So I myself have an account on GitHub, and this now is one of my repositories. You'll see it at the top here because it was updated 36 seconds ago. But obviously, an empty repository is very boring. So I'm going to grab this little thing here. I'm going to come into here. I'm going to git remote add this. Should have done this beforehand. Anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare this local file system for use in a Git repository. So this file system here has app.py, readme.md. These are the two files that I care about. So I created a Git repository here, and I'm going to do git add app.py, readme.md, status, git commit -m, initial commit, status, git log. So I'm running a lot of commands, and I'll explain them in just a second, but I'm doing this because now, if I refresh this page, you will see, ta-da. So this is the app.py that I showed a few seconds ago, and this is the readme.md. Now, the interface that Google Drive gave us to the zip file was very poor. Technically, yes, we can still see stuff inside it, but we can't even click on anything. There's basically no user experience to this. I'm not hammering away at Google Drive to say that it's bad. I'm more talking about that Google Drive is not a tool used to distribute software projects. People don't use it for that. There's not a reason that you can't do it. It's just that it's not a tool built for that. So if we head back into our new repository on GitHub, migrate app with the files in it, one thing you'll actually see is at the top of this, it'll show my username, initial commit, with some characters here 24 seconds ago. So if I click on this little, what's called a commit hash here, you'll see that about 1 minute ago, I changed 2 files with 14 additions and 0 deletions because I added 2 files. These files didn't exist before. So all of a sudden, you see I've got my Python application with the fix that I applied earlier, and it works. But one thing you'll notice is that I stated here that it can add 2 numbers together, and it does that via having a plus route, which adds 1 number to another number. So if we try and use that thing, and we do 1 plus 2, it gives us -1, which is not 1 plus 2. Now we go and we debug it, and we go, okay, what did I do wrong? And you'll see all this code is completely right, except this is a minus sign when it's supposed to be a plus. Now, I could go and change it and make this change right now, but GitHub has a flow of how problems and things like this can actually be tracked. And it tracks those things in what's called issues. So underneath migrate app, I'm going to create a new issue, and I'm going to call it does not add 2 numbers correctly. And in this, I'm going to copy this URL that I have here. When I go to the above route, instead of giving me 3, it gives me -1. And submit new issue. So as software projects grow and become more complex over time, it becomes more and more useful to actually track things such as issues within GitHub. Of course, you can use a spreadsheet, you can use an external Kanban board, you can use Jira, but this is a feature baked directly into GitHub. Now, if for whatever reason I was too busy to actually be able to fix this issue, I can leave this for some other time to come back to. But the thing is as well, is GitHub is collaborative. I called this session GitHub Collaboration at Scale, because if, say, this was a personal project that I was working on with multiple people, I could come in here and other people could add issues. So if someone else found this bug before I did, they could have come in here, added this note of changes that have to be made, and I would see it. So I know there's changes to be made because what I wrote has a problem in it. So I come back and I make the change. And if we use the analogy defined previously, if I was doing this the wrong way, I would just copy it to a zip file or make a new folder, and I would call it v2. This doesn't scale, and this is not how GitHub works, thankfully. Now, doing a lot on the command line, Don't worry about it. It's not the point of this talk to actually talk about how to do this. I kind of leave it up to, there's bazillions of resources online. I just added the change that I made. I'm going to commit fixed plus, and I'm going to do git push origin master. Just like that, you will see that if I open up app.py, that it now has plus. So great. But you might ask, but Jack, app.py doesn't have v2. How do you know what app.py was before I made that change? This is where the magic of Git and version control comes in. This fancy button you see here called blame, if I click this, every single line is now annotated with who made those changes and how long ago they made them and the commit that they added them. So as you see here, this commit added 34 seconds ago that I labeled fixed plus. It added one thing denoted by this green +1, and it removed one thing denoted by this -1. And if I actually see this initial commit here, and I want to see, okay, so before I made this change, what does this file look like? There's a button here called history. So this gives you a chronological view of the repository. So if I go back to what it was 6 minutes ago, I can click here, and there you go. I can see this very file, and I can see that 6 minutes ago, it was a minus. But then I can see that a minute ago, I made the change that caused that minus to become a plus. So GitHub is very smart. It doesn't actually do copies of entire files. What it does instead is it keeps track of changes to those files. That's why you saw earlier when we talked about the initial commit being a change that added 2 files. After the fact, anything else is not an addition of new files, unless you do add new files. It's just a modification of existing data. So we fixed the problem that before we were quite messy with this, we might have had multiple versions. And now, whenever we make changes such that, I don't know, I want to rename this one to add because I think add's better. And I need to rename the README as well. It can add 2 numbers together. And then I add these changes. Check that I've modified app.py, git commit, rename plus, and just like that, we've pushed what is now, refresh this page, the 3rd commit to the repository, which I've renamed plus to and, but I mucked up the name because I typed it incorrectly. It's besides the point. So I can come back into here and you'll see that does not add 2 nums correctly, is still labeled as opened, but I'm going to close this issue because I resolved it. This is an insanely small scale usage of GitHub, but you can see by this that we remove the need to have the complex sharing of multiple files, and instead we have a very refined way. Oh, what programming language is using? So this is just Python. It's a 10-line long Python application. The programming language itself is meant to be not really relevant here. This could be Java, this could be C, in this case, it's Python, could be JavaScript. GitHub doesn't really care what files you use. Thankfully, it will syntax highlight what you want. But so these changes here, as you see, are all attributed to me. And this is a very simple repository. And I could add more changes, but instead of trying to add more changes, I'm going to show you a considerably more complex repository. So this is Facebook's React. React is a front-end library that Sammy talked about earlier. So something that Colab uses. Oh, Kevin, I think they're going to be having a recording put of this afterwards. So yeah, React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. And this is the code behind it. So this code is obviously considerably more complex than this baby application here. And instead of where we have our measly 3 commits, React has 14,000 commits. and even there was a commit 2 hours ago. So if you just had a file on a computer like so, and you just see document v2.pdf, and I'll keep coming back to this because I want to keep drilling in that this is still just a file system. I know that this is on my computer so that I likely added it, but if this was not on my computer, how would I know exactly who added this file? So let's see. This person, Sebastian, made a change about 2 hours ago to React. And the change that he made is some text here that I don't really understand. But basically, this user made some changes to this code base. And this is the second bit that I want to get into, which is one of the main usages of a version control system, such as GitHub. Imagine there is 100 people trying to work on a code base all at once. And one user edits this file and they change it to hello GitHub session folk to hi GitHub session folk. But then another user decides to change it to hello there GitHub session folk. Now, obviously, an issue that arises with this is that one user has made a change and say their change gets in. The other user, their change can't go in because their change can't be cleanly applied onto the other person's change. Now, that's a concept for another day called merge conflicts, but chances are when you're working on a feature, you'd like to keep that feature contained into what is usually referred to as a branch. So before we show branches in React, I'm going to create a branch here. So let's say I want to create a new feature that will be add remove or add subtract. Like add but subtract instead. And I'm going to assign this to myself. I'm going to put the label of required on this issue. So this is a feature that I want my app to have. So what I'm going to do is instead of committing this feature directly to master, I'm going to create a branch. So you can do that by in this UI here, going here and going subtract. So now I have what is a branch off of master. You can think of branches like branches of a tree. There is the root master branch, usually also referred to as main, and there is branches that contain features as they're being worked on. So I have this branch called subtract. I want to check it out locally, so I'm going to do git fetch to make sure my local git is fetched with synced with my remote, and I'm going to do git checkout subtract. Now this feature is very easy. I take the existing route, paste it down here, subtract. Just like that, we have our new subtract route. We test it to make sure it does what we expect it to do. So now if we do 1, subtract 2, we get the negative one we got before, but this makes more sense because this is the subtract endpoint. So we have the change that we made. I'm going to remove this up here. And I want to push this change. So I am going to add this change that I just made. I'm going to commit it, add subtract endpoint, git push origin master, git push origin. So come back in and you'll notice if I head to my app and I'm on the master branch, app lacks the thing that I just added, even though I push changes. Thankfully, the change that I made is now in a different branch. It's in the subtract branch. So this branch is a branch off of master that contains the change that I made 32 seconds ago in this commit, and it adds it. And the reason that I did this is another, like I was saying before, but the crucial features of GitHub, it's a pull request. So I'm going to click compare and pull request because this code that I've added to another branch, I want to bring into the main branch. So I'm going to say add subtract endpoint. It is the same as the other endpoint, but for subtracting, I'm going to say resolves add subtract endpoint, create pull request. So this is where I spend most of my time in a given day, is not necessarily writing code for Colab, but likely reviewing my own code and reviewing other people's code. So say you come to Migrate app, you see this issue here, you click on it, and you'll see that linked a pull request that will close this issue 21 seconds ago. So what this pull request is this is a feature branch that has a change in it that resolves an issue. But of course, you don't always want to be pushing your changes continuously into the same melting pot that everyone else is pushing their changes to. Otherwise, it'd be hectic. You push in a change that conflicts with somebody else's, or say if the thing you added has a bug, it'd be nice for that stuff to actually be reviewed beforehand before it finally gets put in all the way. So head over to files changed, and we'll see that this pull request adds this route. But let's say there's something wrong with it. Let's say, for whatever reason, our goals have changed and we want to rename this from subtract to minus. So I'm going to call this, going to add a comment on my own pull request. And in the case of other people, you'd likely be doing it with someone else. So if I open this up and I do subtract instead, minus instead of subtract, and I say start review, then I want to finish my review and I'll add this as a comment. So the code that I've added, now I've commented on it myself, but you can imagine this could be someone making this change and someone reviewing it. But as a software developer, this is likely where you will sadly spend a lot of your time. You will add code to branches, and then you will tag other people. In this case, I can't tag anyone because it's just me, and you will make changes. So I come in, and let's say for some reason I am someone else, and I'll say, okay, Jack Harrhy. I mean, I'm not, I am the exact same person. But I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to call it minus. This. Because I'm a good developer, I am going to check that this works. Obviously, this endpoint is not found anymore, but if I change this then to minus 1 minus 2, it works perfectly fine. So and then add this change. And this change, of course, isn't changing the whole function or changing the whole file. It's simply modifying the lines that I just wanted to make changes to. So I say fixes from PR comments. I looked up the branch name because I'm not sure what I'm doing. Just like that. So our branch did previously just contain one commit, but now it contains 2 commits. So I've labeled this commit as fixes from PR comments. If you see, this makes the change that changes subtract to minus. And now I have resolved this conversation. I can hit this button here. Then I can hit merge pull request. And just like that, the changes that I had in my subtract branch that were branched off of master have now been merged into master. So if you go back to the commits here, you'll see my commits are added, and now this commit up here is added. Merge pull request number 3 from Jack Harrhy /subtract. So now the changes that I made, that I got reviewed by myself, have now been committed and they exist in the repository. Yet again, the project I'm showing you is so basic that you could likely fit this entire website in a text message, and that is besides the point. I'm showing a very simple example because as code scales and you get to the point where you have a repository the size of React, you need these tools to function. I'm going to get in a second to the value of GitHub. And the value of GitHub is something that, as any software developer or any learning, budding software developer, is something you should really get into now rather than later. So I thankfully have some files here that are React files, such as if I go into packages, React, and then I look at, I don't know, index.js. So this is some JavaScript code. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you'll see here, this single file has 12 contributors on this one file. And I could even go to this button, blame, and I can see that all of these files, everything in this file has a username connected to it. So I can see that 8 months ago, this line was modified, and I can even go directly to here, and I can then see the change that was made in every line of code that this user touched. What's even nice about the UI here is you'll see that it gives you a pull request number. So as before we had pull request number 3, this is ID number 18,000, merged in February of 2020. So we click on this link here, and this is going to be much more complex than the pull request that we just closed then. This file changes about 2,000 lines of code, and it's done by this user, and some bots did some things. A bunch of people were tagged to review it. You can see here, the different users have left different comments on this pull request on React. It's quite big, so it's loading quite slowly, but you'll see that this user, comments on it. This other user asks, "Oh, do you mind removing this piece of code?" And this user says, "Sure." And then likely after this, conversation happened, this user then pushed changes, which likely fixed this user's issues. So as you can see by this example here, what we did for this migrate app has blown this out of the water. I don't know how you'd even manage to begin to manage a project as big as React with something like this. It just wouldn't scale. You can go to Google Drive if you want, but this simply wouldn't work. GitHub and Git and version control in general, they're solutions built to specifically fix this stuff. We've been writing code for a very long time, and we came up with these solutions for a reason. So I'm going to now talk about the value of GitHub. Who exactly benefits from GitHub? Why is it useful? And what opportunities do you get from using GitHub? So as Dan was saying earlier, GitHub is a skill that a lot of people and a lot of companies, even companies in town, use on an everyday basis. So when I have my resume here, this resume is mine, and I use it to get the job I currently have at Colab, and you scroll down and you see I have a section down here dedicated to personal projects that I've worked on. So one such personal project is my own website. So I'm going to open it up here. And so if I was a potential employer and I was curious, this person that just gave me their resume, what do they know? Like, what's their current skill as a programmer? GitHub in many ways is a resume. Like, I have a resume that's a PDF file that you see in front of you, but I treat my own GitHub account like my own personal portfolio for anyone to see the work that I do. So this is my own website that's currently live that you can head to right now, and this is the code behind it. Now this repository has some Crystal code. To be honest, the specifics of it doesn't really matter, but all it is I would like to say the code that I write I'm pretty happy about. So when I go and I apply for jobs, I show people this stuff because I'm quite enthusiastic about it. If you're originally starting out, the tricky thing is, of course, is, say if you're in Comp 1001 at MUN and you're doing some personal projects on the side that are quite simplistic, or maybe you want to get started doing a personal project on the side, because eventually you want to have some sort of internship working somewhere, and you know that companies out there are looking for skills for you to put on your resumes. GitHub, as Dan said earlier, is one of the most crucial skills that you can add to your belt. So I have a number of projects here. I only listed a couple. I have about 103 repositories. I don't know how many of them are actually good. If you keep scrolling back in this list of repositories, back to 2014, as Samia said earlier, you will find my first Git repository about 7 years ago. Canvas tutorial was a small Python-based web server that runs a few pages that showcase the HTML5 Canvas element. It's also my first Git repo. So there's a reason that I showed you Python earlier, and that is because the first piece of code that I put up on GitHub 7 years ago was a Python application. Now, this Python application is 44 lines instead of our example 14. It's also Python 2, because that's usually what you use 7 years ago. And this is something that I built ages ago. And it's how I got started on GitHub. It was a project that I wanted to work on my own time. I put it together and I put it on GitHub. And what's nice about this is that it's almost like, for artists, usually you'd use sites like DeviantArt. I'm not sure if this stuff, for written work, you go to a publisher, you use many online forms to put your work on. For GitHub, GitHub is the place that you put code. It was the place that I've put code. It's a place that I've been putting code for many years now. When I apply for jobs, I give them my GitHub link as basically, you want to see what I'm all about, this link tells you everything you need to know. So if you're someone that is actually working at a company, reviewing stuff, you come in here and you see that, oh, this person's built this project and this project does this thing. This is Metrobus Spy. This is a thing that I built that gives you the latitude and longitude of every bus in the metro area. Yeah, this is GitHub. It's definitely something that's tricky. One thing that I've heard is that a lot of people look at the CLI tool that I used earlier, and they're quite intimidated by it. And they think that, what are all these commands that you're running? I don't know what they are. And I will completely agree with you. Sometimes when you're working on assignments, you will likely revolt to just doing this. And that is completely fine. But what I'm saying is learning the skills that allow you to write repositories like this one eventually will allow you to even contribute to repositories such as React. And eventually, in the future, once you do have a job that you can work for, that job will most likely be using Git and likely also using GitHub. Of course, there are more than just GitHub. There's Bitbucket, there's GitLab. You can self-host it as well, but GitHub is definitely the big one. And it is one of the most crucial skills that I think you can learn as a developer. So thanks a lot for listening to me spiel on. This is now the Q&A session. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the Zoom chat. I know that one of the questions before that I answered was the programming language I was using, which is Python. Do we have any questions about the presentation and GitHub in general?
There's one question, Jack. This is Marlene. Kamal is asking, are there any advantages of using GitHub over other tools such as GitLab?
So GitHub itself is one of the largest platforms on there right now. Truth be told, there is no strong disadvantages. If you want to use GitLab, GitLab has most of the same features, if not all, of GitHub. So if you head to GitLab itself, you'll see it has the exact same features of GitHub. GitHub is a hub for Git. GitLab is also a lab for Git. The underlying tool for both GitHub and GitLab is basically the exact same thing. I mean, some people who are, trying to vet job applications and stuff, they might look at GitLab and be a bit confused. But I, for one, do actually have a GitLab as well, and I have a page here. So this basically is the exact same thing. as what I had over here in my my GitHub profile. So I have list of repositories here. I can come in, I can click on, say, this project I worked on a number of years ago. I can come in here and I can view commits. Everything that I showed you in GitHub, you can do in GitLab. I mean, there are two different websites. GitHub is, like I said before, it's the one that most people opt for. On their main page, you'll see that 72% of the Fortune 50 companies utilize GitHub. So that stat alone tells you a lot about how often it's used. I know for one at Bluedrop and Colab, at one point in time, we used Bitbucket as our source control, which yet again, it's the same type of things. Instead of it being Git, it's Bit and it's Bucket. Each one seems to be just a play on words of both Git and storage devices. But yeah, no, it is an option. It is not the option. It's the option that I and many other millions of developers opt to use. So I'll move on to the next question there. Dan Lewis, is it normal practice to delete a branch once you finish with it? Yes. Branches themselves are just tags on commits. So once a branch is done and merged into master, it's basically useless. So you'll see before when I was showing how exactly you'd make a change in migrate app, you'll see I only have one branch. It's because once I merged in this pull request, the branch itself became pretty useless. All the commits that the branch contained are now in master. Therefore, that's why when I saw the delete branch button, I gave it a big old click. It is annoying as well when you have a project that you have a lot of branches. It is usually recommended to clean them up. Obviously, if a piece of code isn't in master and in a branch, but for some reason shouldn't go into master, then likely you would probably keep that up. Even GitHub themselves, they have a key here for stale, which you can view any potential stale branches that are there. So Pauline Maxwell has a question. Thank you, Dan Lewis, and thank you, Kamal, as well. So for training institutions, how do they access GitHub for their students and costs to do so? So the great thing about GitHub, and I didn't go into this, and thanks for bringing it up, is you'll see when I went to create a repository, I had the option between public and private. Now, this is a very simple option between two things, but these are two very different things. GitHub contains open source software, and it also contains closed source software. So Colab software, for example, has many repositories, but if you try and view Colab software when you're not logged into it, so if I grab this link, make sure that I don't open it up for you all to see. This is an incognito tab. I go to Colab, and you'll see that this organization has no public repositories. But if you go to my user account, now I do have private repositories, but I chose to make this one public. So thankfully, if the training institution that you're working for is okay with having the code that you write open for the public to see, you don't have to pay anything. That's the wonderful thing about GitHub. GitHub's bread and butter is for companies like Colab that want to have code on GitHub that isn't accessible to all users. So a private repository locked behind being logged into it and being part of the organization. Let's say for whatever reason, Migrate app is so good that I wanted the world to be hidden away from it. I can come in here, I can change visibility to private, and I also have to then type in the name. All of a sudden, Migrate app is private. And I put in my password. And here we are. So this is private. If I give you this link, it won't work anymore. And if I want to add people to this repository, I can invite collaborators. There's a limit to the amount of people that I can add, and there's a limit to the amount of features that I now have access to now that this thing is private. It's an entire topic in general about why one would even want to put their code as open source in the first place. But yes, GitHub for institutions, if you want to have your stuff open to the world, is completely free. And if you want to have it locked down, GitHub does indeed have pricing, in which, of course, free for basically everything if it's public, and then there's per user terms as well. I'm sure if it was a training institute, you'd likely be able to get some free stuff as well. Next question there, thank you, Pauline, is about any tips for using GitLab in collaboration with non-technical personnel, for example, developers working with product managers. And that was a typo, GitHub. So GitHub itself, I talked about before with having a directory full of messy files, but this, of course, is quite accessible. There are a lot of people that are project managers that don't necessarily actually know how to code. And it's completely okay. You can talk project management without knowing a line of code, but it's good to be able to have things managed in such a way that project managers know when things are happening. So earlier, when I was showing GitHub issues, and I did the whole pull request workflow where I added these two issues and I had pull requests, even if you don't look at a line of code and you come in here, say if Migrate app had a problem, and so my non-technical person comes in and realizes there's an issue with the application. So they can come in here, new issue, they just get given a textual interface to be like, app is not working when I do this. And let's say you want them to include a screenshot. So you'll come in, you'll open up whatever screenshot tool you have of choice. You will take a screenshot of the app like so. And GitHub allows you to then, I can actually have my window open properly, drag and drop this screenshot in, you can preview how it looks, submit new issue, and just like that, you've got the screenshot you added and app is not working when I do this. Agile and Kanban boards and issue tracking in general is a topic for another day. Many tools like that integrate quite well with GitHub, just like how there's lots of people that are Salesforce developers that built development integrations into Salesforce to make Salesforce better for certain business people. GitHub has the same thing. So if you're someone that likes working in Jira, for example, I'm not going to get into issue tracking because that is its own topic for another day. Technically, this is an issue. This is not Jira, and Jira is, like I said, I'm going to stop talking about it. That is a bag of worms. But yeah, so GitHub has tools that allow you and views of things that I wouldn't say are stupidly technical. Obviously, there is a lot on this page. You do have to kind of know where to go. But say I had attributed a pull request to this issue. You can tell a project manager, if there's a pull request open for this issue and it's not merged yet, the thing's not done. You might even, what you want to do is label this as, this is for release 3.1. So I'll call this release 3.1. So just like that, we have a new release label and say user wants to come in here, filter by release 3.0, and just like that, they can view it. So yeah, there's lots of things that you can do to make work that goes on in GitHub a bit more accessible to non-technical folk. Thank you for the question. Jacob Pete. So question there. Thanks, Jack, for this today. Question for you. What do you think about putting multiple small projects onto GitHub rather than just only on bigger projects? Should someone like myself be worried about cluttering my GitHub with less complex programs and upload the more complex programs? That is a really good question. Depends on who you ask. Some people might be concerned with how clean the GitHub looks. I am not one of those people. I have 103 repositories, and I'm telling you, that is not 103 high quality pieces of work. I would like to say that my more recent projects are more complex than my old ones, but if you keep going down in my repositories list, you'll find a lot of, not garbage, but things that I threw together quite quickly because I wanted to. I think a number of years ago, I built a very simple Python script that would take in data and convert it to binary. And I wanted to put it on GitHub, so I did. I mean, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. If you're someone who's just starting out and trying to get into the field, I wouldn't be overly concerned about either quantity or overly quality. I mean, always think about quality to some degree. And if you have 50 repositories and they're all one line long, I'm not saying do that. What I'm saying is you don't need to feel that everything you put on GitHub has to be a shiny, starry project for everyone to look at. You can put pretty much whatever you feel that you want to put up on it. Really good question. So thank you, Jacob. Pauline, in Newfoundland, Labrador, what percentage of IT companies would require GitHub knowledge for employment? So IT specifically, in the more managing computers and not necessarily development, I would say maybe not an insane amount, but every startup that has a website, or every company such as Verifin, every company that I've touched has touched GitHub. I have not heard a company, there are other terms such as like Perforce, Mercurial, they exist, but Git is by and large the be all end all of it. GitHub specifically, there is both Git knowledge and GitHub knowledge. And I was talking earlier about GitLab. A lot of the concepts and stuff covered with GitHub, such as pull requests, issues, branches, you'll find all of those things in most of the other major Git hosting services, such as GitLab and Bitbucket. Both of them have pull requests and things like that. It's not a skill that I'd say would take you a very long time to learn, thankfully. The learning curve is a little bit steep in getting started. And of course, if a company thinks you're valuable and you have no Git experience, they will bring you on board and they will teach you, hopefully in onboarding, how to use Git. I just know for one, like I've worked in projects before at MUN, and the professor's been like, okay, team of 5, go off and do this thing. And they don't even tell you what to use, they just tell you to do it. So yeah, GitHub is, and Git specifically, is a tool that I'd say basically everybody who's writing code will use to some level, to some degree. The second that you have more than one person and you have the idea of branches and stuff, like you need to be using Git and version control systems in general. Thanks for your questions, Pauline, really good.
Okay, we're almost out of time, Jack. So I'm just gonna, I think, do we have one more? Oh, Regan just posted in the chat that we are hosting another student session at the end of April on the 28th about Amazon Web Services. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank Jack for a great presentation and answering such good questions as well. And there will be a door prize. We'll take everybody's name who attended today and we'll do a draw, and Regan will be reaching out to the winner for a collab hat, sweatshirt, and sticker combo. So thanks to everybody for being here, and we'll keep you updated when there's new student sessions coming. Thanks so much, Jack.
Thank you, Pauline. Thanks, everyone.